False alarm. I thought that help was here. But it was my own reassurance bouncing round 100,000 times in my own ecosphere. If every time you speak you keep it off the record, consequently you could keep your record clear. In my own ecosphere. And every time you speak that shakes your frail beliefs, you only seek to insulate your image and continue down the stream in the direction clout and credit steers. Directly from your mouth into am I the asshole Reddit's ears. Directly back into the greasy pockets of some Gates Foundation financiers. And then directly back into the frantic final thoughts of early trial Neuralink volunteers, staring at the numb and mumbling vacancies where recently had been their peers. Half of whom are glitching with the memory stuck on pause, and half have zero fucking clue just who they are or why they're here. It's been said that fear is all we have to fear, but that was back before the basosphere condenser came along, distilling concentrated fear that's diamond pure, crystal clear, oppressor strong, and woven into every single article you read and song they let you hear. And then Elon heard that Jeff enhanced our fears by 86%, and he said, hold my beer. And not a single sheep among the herd would turn their head or say a word, cause they were all too busy begging for the shears, begging for the muzzle, happy just to guzzle, feed, and watch a screen for all their years. Man, to each his own, can't afford a home, but they'll let you have your cozy little ecosphere, where there among your own devices you can break the seventh seal, overthrow the oracles, and slay the seer. All the tomes were burned and all the lips were seared. Shut your eyes and all our lives just disappear. Now blink them twice. Welcome to your ecosphere.
Legend says that Hercules swept Cerberus right off his feet and effortlessly set him down softly as a songbird. Atlas kept the world upon his back, and every day wondered whether he could stand it any longer. And Reade came out to say the man they tried to label the messiah of morality was really just another rapist. And I don't intend to hesitate when asked who was the stronger. Tara, like Assange, knew that carrying the truth would be the hardest labor. Tara knew that her assailant wasn't gonna make us any safer, and knew he's just the type of man to hand a decent foreign leader US printed walking papers, and knew he'd be relentless and aggressive in the war he'd wage upon her very character, that his attempts to weaken and degrade and embarrass her would be her only compensation. But I strongly doubt that anyone could ever have foreseen the stream of hate that came from quote-unquote progressives and the self-styled titans of survivor advocation. So if you really think there's something to be gained out of sharing your pain with the world, you are sorely mistaken. The Biden team just drug their feet addressing Tara's allegations. Until they had a decent list of smears, then they aired them out on every station. And it turns out no one wants to hear the truth of who they praised as being worthy of such bloated liberal celebration. That no one wants to really know the person they've so valiantly defended, even when it meant they had to gloat and shit all over someone braver than they'd be if given the occasion. Now cue the faceless comment squad invasion. Cue those fuckers crawling out the woodwork to come analyze the way you wore your hair and what you wear. Like your appearance waives your rights, or that somehow you're the reason for your situation. Somehow they've decided you should bear responsibility for what such monstrous men insist on doing. Somehow they're deluded by the empty, hypocritical, and useless fucking platitudes that bastard keeps on spewing. And I think it's very telling that the best of their excuses when they try to come and justify our president's abuses is a hearty butt Trump. In which case I'll remind you that you never saw the news attempt to sell us Donald Trump like he was morally upstanding or a decent human. But when Joe says something bigoted or ogles someone's little kid, CNN says, isn't this refreshing? Biden's like a mix of JFK and FDR with all the finer parts of Harry Truman. Christ, I know that they don't think that we're the brightest, but at least pretend we got a couple lumens. Ask yourself if you have ever questioned what they fed you, or do you just shut your eyes and then consume it? And now ask yourself if you ate every one of Biden's lies under guise of harm reduction and the promise of a slight improvement. And now imagine long ago that Biden chose to show you who he really was by traumatizing you for his amusement. Now imagine that you watched him touch a Bible with those filthy hands, and then assume the power of the highest seat in all the land, of knowing your attacker wields a global coalition born of three-letter agencies who'll make a life's mission out of trying to discredit you through lies, damn lies, and collusion. Big tech is never gonna separate from our surveillance state. Fuck's sakes, they're just a breath away from total fusion. So there will come a time where even if you see the light, your voice will never reach the sky through all the bots and all the noise pollution. So trust us when we tell you that the masking of abuses is perhaps this country's oldest institution. And I know nothing nobler than facing it in honor of the truth when you know that the people holding power have been neutralizing truth since there was wet ink on the Constitution. So know that Tara's truth is something crucial to the movement. And if you see yourself a partner to the revolution, help this country see through all the baseless propaganda through the crux of Joe's illusions. And recognize that Tara Reade gave everything she had so she could tell us what the truth is. Recognize the decent thing to do when someone bears their soul and shows their bruises is not to ask for context or offer up your own solutions. Your job is just to listen with an honest mind and put yourself on Tara's side a moment so you understand the path she chooses. That there is no instant fame worth the dragging of your name. And if that's what you think, you've a lot to learn about the kind of facts the mob can handle and the kind that it refuses. You've a lot to learn about the news and all its many uses. Guess you've yet to learn the truth the news will serve as fruit from which they've squeezed out all the juices. And we all eat the husk and just pretend it's full of nutrients and isn't really useless. But the jaws of our ability to yield accountability are absolutely toothless. So don't you kid yourself that any lips are being loosened. They won't ever tell us where the bodies are or show us where the proof is. It's on you to recognize the lechery our president so regularly oozes. It's on you to muster up some honesty and ask yourself how Biden won your trust, but it's America that loses. Open up your eyes and learn to recognize the bruises. Open up your eyes and learn to recognize the bruises.
They'll gladly pay you by the hour for a minute or so, so you can sign off on the towers where the...
Welcome everyone to the Politics of Survival. Thank you and welcome back. Every Monday night, 7 o'clock, you can find us here Pacific time. But tonight it's 9 o'clock Pacific time because we're speaking to someone really special tonight. He's a British journalist, he's independent. He is on the ground. He's done so much work in different countries, covering conflicts and calling out governments for their warmongering. And the military-industrial complex seems to have us all worldwide in a stranglehold. And tonight, Johnny Miller is in the Donbass region of Ukraine live, and he's here to give us an update. Welcome, Johnny. Thank you for coming.
Hi, Tara. How you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. You know, we were talking pre-show here about different levels of censorship in different countries. But first, let's talk about what's going on with you. When did you get there, and what's happening?
Yeah, so I've been reporting from Donbass for most of the last 6 months. I was in Kiev briefly in April when the Russians had surrounded it, but I left there and then I came to Donbass. And it's crazy. It's a very underreported story here. It's quite quiet at the moment, which is strange. But most of the time I've been here, you've got constant Ukrainian shelling of civilian areas. In the center of town, there's no military targets, or very hard to see any military targets. And the Ukrainians bomb bus shelters, markets. 2 of my apartments have been hit. Last time I was here a month ago, it's terrifying just leaving the house. You have to make a decision. You know, do I need that from the shop over the road? Is it too dangerous to go out? Some days I have to chase the incoming. It lands in a street with no damage. Sometimes it's a bus station with bodies lying in the street, or a youth center with a 24-year-old woman lying dead on the pavement. And it's just an incredibly underreported story, and it's an important story. And of course, this has been going on for 8 years. This war in Ukraine is at its root is a civil war between Ukrainian nationalists who took power in Kiev in 2014 and its pro-Russian population, which is largely in the south and the east. And that's when the civil war started. This war is also an attempt by Russia to secure, as it sees its geostrategic security, particularly Crimea, and it's also an attempt by NATO to damage Russian power. But this is why this is such an important story of Ukraine bombing its own people. They've been doing it since 2014. It's fascinating. There has been some honest reporting on that. If you go on YouTube, you can see a fantastic report by CNN in 2014. And she's saying exactly the same as I've just said now, in that Ukraine is just bombing and shelling the people here. And that's why the people here in Donbass no longer want to be part of Ukraine. And so it's such an important story because it shows that there is a peace to be had in Ukraine, and it's not just all Russia's fault. And there is a peace to be had rather than just sending weapons to Ukraine. If we listen to the civilians here in Donetsk, they clearly no longer want to be part of Ukraine. You know, I go to the funerals of children, a 6-year-old girl killed by Ukrainian shelling, and going to a funeral of a child killed in war. It's a real tragedy. And speaking to the mother of that child, I went back to interview a few months later, and she said, I asked her, you know, did you vote in the recent referendum to join Russia? And she said, yes, I voted to join Russia because they've been killing us for 8 years. So it's an important story, and there's almost no mainstream reporters here. Well, there's no mainstream reporters here. So that's why I'm here and trying my best to tell that story.
I'm glad you are. You know, I've been following your work for a long time. You and I have communicated, and I just think the world of you. I think that you bring a lot of integrity to the world of journalism, which has lost a lot of integrity. You know, basically in the West, we're seeing stenographers rather than actual investigative journalists or war correspondents or any kind of journalism, actually. And the fact that you say there's no Western journalists there says everything, because they want a certain narrative. And if they were there, boots on the ground, they would have to report what they're seeing. Could Reeve, could you put up the clip with Johnny? I think it's the one in front of the store, but either one. And we're going to play this, Johnny, real quick, and then you can kind of fill in after. It's like a few seconds. Yeah.
No, I've just
all right, so audience, Reeve is gonna, there you go, right there. Yeah,
just
here you go.
Back in Donetsk, and about 8:30 this morning, there was a massive strike near the center of the city. You can see the damage here. It was a pharmacy and a market, also on the second floor, furniture shop. The casualties are not yet known, but All morning we've heard the whistle of missiles and the anti-air defense working in the skies above the city. But this is the reality for people living in Donetsk. Any time the Ukrainian army could strike with one of these attacks. And this is a civilian area, civilian targets, no military targets around here. Now I've just arrived back.
Thanks. So for the audience, that was Johnny just arriving. So Johnny, could you fill in the blanks a little bit about the aftermath, how many casualties there were and what happened with that?
Yeah, that's when I arrived back just about a week ago now. So the local authorities say 3 people killed in that strike. But as I said, it has been much quieter now. I mean, and that was a big strike, a major strike. But normally here, last month and for most of the last 6 months, it's just constant shelling of the center. So it's just part of the daily life. And almost every day, civilians killed on the street or in their apartments or in shops. And it's just that almost kind of trickle of civilian casualties that's just part of daily life here. And I said it has quietened down the last couple of weeks since I've been back. I suspect because of the major fighting around in the north of Donbass and around the city. The Russians, of course, mobilized huge forces. So I think the Ukrainians are very much concerned with the Russian soldiers now, rather than just terror bombing Donetsk. Yesterday, I was out on the outskirts of the city with some humanitarian aid workers, where there's constant artillery duels. We saw one strike which landed about 30 meters away from our vehicle as we were driving. We then saw Russian units, artillery unit, race out from the site of that incoming, and we stopped, and 2 Russian soldiers were loaded into our van, wounded, and we rushed them to hospital. We got there, one of the soldiers was very badly wounded, so that was a successful Ukrainian strike on a Russian artillery unit. But around those outskirts, there's a huge amount of civilians as well. And in the center of Donetsk, I said, now it's quite quiet. On the outskirts, I mean, it's crazy. You go there and you think, why are people still living here with the constant boom of the artillery, houses being hit? And right now on the outskirts of Donetsk and in the north of Donbass, it's hell, particularly for the soldiers there, as war. It's one of those fierce fighting we're seeing so far. Wow. And so much of that isn't being reported as well, but dozens, if not hundreds of soldiers, particularly Ukrainian soldiers with the overwhelming Russian artillery, are dying every day in Donbass at the moment.
Well, you know, in my other life during the day, I'm a producer for the Kim Iverson show, and I really appreciated your appearance on there. And when I reached out to you, and you can find Kim's show at 3 p.m. live every day Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern on Rumble. So every 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. And you were on there talking about, you know, one of the most poignant things was the Western, just that there's no Western reporting about it. And we know why, right? And I think my audience that tunes into me mostly knows why. And I have a lot of international people that tune in that may or may not realize I have some Australian and some English audience and British from the British Isles and whatnot in Ireland. But you know, what's not being told here is that the Kiev regime is consistently bombing its own people. And the other part of that is that you are on a Ukraine military, or I mean, actually it's a Ukraine ministry kill list. I was told I was on it too, but I don't know the validity of that. But I know you are for sure, and Wyatt Reade and Ava Bartlett. Can you talk about that a minute? And that kind of goes hand in hand with the whole aggression from Kiev towards eastern Ukraine, Donbass.
Yes, so the website is called Mirot Verets, which in Ukrainian means peacemaker. It's a very Orwellian term.
Ironic.
Yeah, it's so it's an official enemies of Ukraine list. Many people call it a hit list or a kill list. At the very least, it promotes violence against anybody on this list. And recently, they started putting children on the list. So I did a story about this 13-year-old girl, the only one who will speak up about it, and her picture, details about her name, her phone number, her home address are listed on this site. And she lives in Luhansk, so she's in the separatist area or the pro-Russian area, so she's somehow protected. But
right.
sorry?
Faina is who you're talking about?
Faina, yeah.
Yeah,
Faina.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So for us, and whenever journalists are killed, it's written liquidated in big red letters over their pictures. So this is a site that promotes violence against journalists, against anybody who's seen as an enemy of the Ukraine, and children. I could make a solid argument to you that a site that's up, this also has connections with the Ukrainian government, but certainly it's run by Ukrainian ultra-nationalists. In any other country, this would be shut down. In America, this would be shut down. I don't know. Well, I hope you agree with that. In any other country, a site that promotes and publishes the home addresses of children and journalists and promotes the violence against them would be illegal. It would be shut down. But it's not being shut down. And I can make a case to you that a website that promotes violence against children is the most serious human rights violation in Europe today. I can make a serious argument that that's the case. And the reason this site is up is because it promotes extremism in Ukraine. Over the last 8 years, there's been some fantastic documentaries by The Guardian. Time magazine did a fantastic documentary about the extremism, the white supremacy extremism in Ukraine. But as soon as Russia's invaded last year, that's suddenly become Russian propaganda. The narrative has switched, and suddenly there's no extremism in Ukraine. There's a huge extremism problem in Ukraine, and everybody knows it. I spoke to a journalist working for one of the major British broadcasters recently, and I said to him, look, and he covered the war from the Ukrainian side. I said to him, look, you all know that there is a serious extremism problem, but you self-censor yourselves. And he agreed. They all know it, that Ukraine is serious. And the reason extremism is so serious in Ukraine is because most Ukrainians didn't want to fight a war with Russia. Most Ukrainians wanted a peace with the separatists in the east over the last 8 years. Most Ukrainians want to live in peace. But the extremists are useful for NATO in order to fight this war, this proxy war against Russia, because it's the extremists, the Azov battalion, neo-Nazis, what have you, they're the ones who are ideologically driven to hate the Russians, to hate the separatists, to want to take back Crimea. And that's why you've had the rise of them and the continued support of them. And that's why this website isn't being taken down, because that extremist element is crucial for NATO's continued proxy war against the Russians. We saw the same thing in Syria as well. In Syria, you had a huge opposition to Bashar al-Assad, but the majority of Syrians didn't want to fight and die and take up arms against Bashar al-Assad. And that's why you had this rise of ISIS and the extremists, when the moderate rebels became the extremists, because the extremists were the ones who really did, for ideological reasons, want to fight against Bashar al-Assad. And that's why extremist groups. You also had the same thing in Afghanistan, of course, with the rise of Al-Qaeda, with the United States funding Islamic extremists to fight the Russians in the 80s in Afghanistan. So you had the rise of Al-Qaeda. So the promotion of extremism is often used in order to fight proxy wars. And that's what we're seeing here in Ukraine as well.
It's stunning, really. And going back to that website too, it has Langley on it, which Langley, Virginia, is the home of the CIA. And what was interesting when I did research into that website, about 6 years ago, the US government called it a terrorist website. Now it's being supported, I think, by an MI6 operative. It has some sort of Elliot Higgins, who operates the NAFO trolls, has some sort of hand with, or, far removed, allegedly, with that website. And I'm still trying to find out more about it. But I do know that Faina has tried to bring it up before the UN and to UNICEF, and the UN won't have a discussion about it. And the UNICEF leader told her and to the people that were, because she had done a little video and she'd done a letter. That's what got her on the kill list, was doing this video to the UN asking for peace, because she'd grown up with shelling. And anyway, the UNICEF leader said that they realized there was a problem, but she was being restricted from speaking about it publicly. I mean, so this is where we are with it. I mean, they're endorsing, there's 337 children on that list, on the kill list. 12 journalists already killed. And then you had Daria Dugina, who was murdered, who was assassinated. And in a recent Spaces, one of the Ukrainian propagandists said that was floating the theory that her father killed her, which is just ludicrous. But that's the level of propaganda that is coming to try to perpetuate, like you were saying, this hate, this extremism, and forcing people to live in terror of being eliminated. And from your perspective, because you're seeing a lot of pushback and a lot of support from the US, like $3.7 billion this month is going in weapons to Ukraine. And they're training on some special large equipment. Some of that training will take 5 to 6 months, but it's happening. Do you see a path forward where perhaps peace can happen and Donbass will be left to Russia? In other words, that those borders will be recognized and those people will be safe? Or is NATO and US trying to make this an endless war to make money? I mean, what's your assessment?
That's the big question you asked. You asked the most important question, and it's one we don't really know at the moment. I mean, I was hoping this winter, because you're seeing a split within NATO as well. You're seeing United States, Britain, Poland, the Baltic states on one side, and then France and Germany with a differing view. France and Germany never really wanted this war, and you can see them being very hesitant, particularly now whether Germany is going to give tanks or not. And I hope that this winter might bring more of that split, and Germany and France pushing for peace in Europe because of rising gas prices, lowering living standards in Europe. We haven't seen that yet. But increasingly, I think you'll see more European nationalists. And I'm not talking about necessarily left-wing anti-war activists. I'm talking about conservative politicians as well. There's a huge amount of conservative people in positions of power in Germany and France who don't think this war is in European interests. So at one point, I think that's the best chance of peace. European governments moving against the policy of the United States. The other way that this war can end is if Russia has a crushing military victory. That's very much what Russia is focusing on at the moment. I think they've lost all faith. They wanted to negotiate even in the beginning of the war. There's allegations that it was Boris Johnson who went to Kiev to stop that peace happening. So the Russians have wanted to negotiate. The Russians, I think, would have been very happy after they took over these 4 regions and they had the referendums. I think Vladimir Putin and the Russians would have been very happy to negotiate then, and with the land that they've taken over, and for peace to happen with some other provisos. But now I think the Russians have lost all faith in NATO and Ukraine, and I think they're very much focused on the military. So, but it's tough for the Russians fighters as well. But I mean, Barack Obama said years ago that NATO couldn't win a war in Ukraine because it's of vital importance to Russia. It's not of vital importance to Europe or America. Donbass, Crimea, they don't need it. So that's why Russia can mobilize huge parts of its economy. The Russian economy, NATO hoped that the Russian economy would crash because of sanctions. It hasn't, doesn't look like it will. They hoped that Putin would fall. He's as popular as ever. And now they hope they can beat Russia on the battlefield. And that's what they're trying to do. But it's very much Russia going forward at the moment. But the question you ask is a good one, and it's interesting. Does NATO even want to win this war? Does it think they can win this war? I'm interested in that. Does NATO believe they can win this war? I'm not sure. I think some of them think they can, or as you say, it's quite possible they may just want this war to continue, and it's in lots of people's interest for it to simply continue.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's the economic incentive when you have Raytheon and Lockheed Martin and some of the European weapons manufacturers that are basically pocketing the money. In fact, my theory about the Leopard tanks in Germany has nothing to do with Germany not wanting to bend a knee to the US, because they do. So I think it's because there's some pressure from the US because they're competing weapons manufacturing. I think there's some, elite pushing behind the scenes.
You may well be right. There's so many weapons being sent by by NATO countries at the moment that the weapons manufacturers are loving it, because all these weapons and tanks are going to have to be replaced. If Germany gives its tanks to Ukraine, well, they're going to have to be replaced. And Poland, all these countries, if they give their German tanks, they're going to have to be replaced. And who's going to win those contracts? German companies or American companies. So yeah, you make a very good point.
So they're having little fights behind the scenes, I think.
Sure.
Yeah, just like as in America, you brought up a really good point about conservatives in Europe and kind of leading the anti-war talk, and that's happening here in the U.S. As a matter of fact, Johnny, you know, I'm going to be speaking at an event called Rage Against the War Machine. I put it backwards. Rage Against the War Machine in DC, and there's a sister event happening at the same time in London. I think Claire Daly and Mick Wallace will be speaking at that one. Here, Max Blumenthal, Jimmy Dore, I will be there. Kim Iverson will be there. Some other people and some other luminaries are going to be attending to DC to speak, and then have a rally about, you know, not to end this proxy war against Russia, US and NATO, and stop spending billions on it. But what's interesting is who's leading it is the Libertarian Party, the conservatives. And it used to be that Democrats, if you knew our politics, that, you know, Democrats were known to be the anti-war from Vietnam. And then what shifted was the money and the politics. And I don't know if you know this about me, but I used to work for Leon Panetta and Biden. I came forward about Biden, so you know about that part. But I know something about that, I had worked as an intern for Panetta. Well, now Leon Panetta sits on the board of Raytheon. So, you know, he's been warmongering. So you have these politicians that are out on CNN or MSNBC or BBC or whatever Western outlet. And a lot of them are sitting on the boards of these weapon manufacturers, but they don't say that. They say, oh, well, he was, you know, the head of the CIA. He was a former CIA head. He worked for Bill Clinton. Well, no, he's sitting on the board of a weapons manufacturing, directly financially benefiting from this war. And that's what we're getting saturated with here. So what's interesting is these are a lot of Democrats. And so I'm not saying there aren't hawks in the neoconservative, because there's neoconservative hawks. But I'm just saying that in this particular moment in history, the anti-war movement is being led by libertarians and you know, anti-war lefties, and that's it. So it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar in the UK. The Labour Party, which is the equivalent to the Democratic Party, has gone further and further to the right. I think it's in the nature of secular capitalism, when the corruption seems to be taken over, and even left-wing parties are becoming more governed by wealthy interests. So you're seeing the same thing in the United Kingdom. Yeah, I forgot what I was going to say next. It's early in the morning here.
That's okay. You know, let me move you on to this question. You are I won't ask you details about how long you're there, because you're kind of a target, and this goes internationally, and I don't want any problems for you. I remember how upset I talked to Wyatt Reade, like right after he was almost, you know, harmed, and it was really close. You know, he almost, it was really close. And Eva Bartlett's been in that position, and now, you know, you're constantly in that danger.
Yeah.
So how are you dealing with the day-to-day, and how do you deal with safety as far as that goes, but still do your reporting? But you've been doing this a long time. I mean, you've been a war correspondent for a long time. You've seen a lot of conflicts. So how does this one compare to the other ones as far as personal safety?
Yeah, I mean, I would say like all wars are the same, and yet very different, but in the same, and just in terms of the bodies, of the risk, of the fear. But they're all different because of, I mean, different realities on the ground. This war is interesting. It's different in that, you know, I'm at an apartment now in the center of Donetsk, and you know, I joke with my translator when we go to the frontline positions, that it's safer there than it is in Donetsk center. And a lot of the time that would be true, because you can just be killed at any moment just walking around the streets. You know, I think the major broadcaster, I mean, the major Russian broadcaster here, Russia Today, I think all their correspondents have to wear bulletproof vests whenever they leave the hotel. You know, I don't, because I'm kind of living here, and it would just be, I can't just do it when I'm popping to the shops and things, and I sort of live here and the people don't. So, but any foreign correspondent, like major BBC or Sky, they came here, they'd be wearing body armor whenever they left the hotel. And that's what. But at the same time, you can feel peaceful sometimes. You go to a restaurant, a cafe. I said it's been quiet for the last couple of weeks, so I have actually been relaxed walking the streets. So that's I think that's the difficult thing here. And you just kind of breathe a sigh of relief when you leave, thinking I've survived this time. So yeah, that's what's different here. So but at the moment, it's harder to move around as well. The new Russian authorities have moved in, so it's more bureaucracy, harder to get places. But I'm trying to get up to Bakhmut, where the real fighting is there, or Zaporozhye direction soon. So that brings its own risks as well.
Oh, does it? Oh, yes, I would imagine so. You know, I mean, I admire the work that you're doing, because so many people are commenting on this conflict, including myself, that are sitting in comfortable places. Like, I'm not worried about being bombed right now. You know, the worst thing I ever worry about is being hassled by the DOJ or FBI, but you know, there you have it. Like, so do a lot of Americans right now, but that's not the same as like living day to day, wondering if you're going to get bombed and shelled. And I really want to drive this home to the audience that's listening and watching, how much terror the people have and the population have today. But there's also, you had said something in an interview that really struck me, that neighbors keep their doors open because of the shelling.
So so I'm in an apartment block, and so all the apartment blocks' front doors are left open, so whenever there's shelling, people can just run into the nearest apartment block. And the local Telegram news channels, they dox apartment blocks who aren't open. This block's not open, you know. And I've used them as well. You know, I've run into these apartment when they're shelling, and it's terrifying. You hear the whistle and explosions, and you run into these apartment blocks for safety, because it's the shrapnel that kills. It sprays off the shrapnel in all areas. And yeah, I mean, going back to what you're saying about the terror of living under the shelling, I interviewed people in the outskirts of the frontline positions yesterday, and you know, all of them saying we want an end to this war to varying degrees. Some of them saying NATO needs to stop supplying weapons to them. Some of them saying, one of the women saying, my mother, who lives on the other side, is dying right now, not war related, but she's dying, and I can't be with her as she dies. And another woman saying, well, they've been killing us for 8 years. Our stand up for longer for victory. We need victory. We can't negotiate with the Ukrainians anymore. The only way is for victory. But all these people wanting peace, and that's because they're the people living under the shelling. I mean, when you've got everyone knows somebody who's been killed, children have been killed, and you're living under the shelling, it's tough, and you see the bodies all the time. You know, I've got a friend in London. My work here is putting a lot of strain on the friendships. A lot of friends don't understand what I'm doing here. They think that I'm a Russian propagandist, all this kind of stuff. That, you know, they're just. Really? And one of my friends described himself as pro-war, and says he celebrates the death of every Russian soldier. And it's just, this is one of the, and you know, change Russian soldier to anybody else, any other nationality. And, you know, being here, as I said, like, schools over the road have been hit with bodies, and when you see the bodies of these innocent people ripped apart by this shrapnel, just in the morning or an afternoon in a market nearby where I live, and you hear people say, I'm pro-war and I celebrate the death of people, and these people have no understanding what it's like in a war or here, no understanding the horror of it. And I think that's one of the most important things as well to people like us to do, to really show what it's like. War is hell, and for people to support war, to sit back and send more weapons, and when people are being slaughtered for no reason, just going to the shops. Yeah.
You know, you must be dealing with a lot of secondary trauma, you know, every day. And I don't think that that's helped when you don't have a support system back home with friends that really understand the value of your work. So you have friends with us here in America, and you have care about you. And I know this war has been very divisive politically in Europe and in the United States. For whatever reason, to me, it's very clear that it's wrong. All Russia wanted was the you know, Minsk Accord to be honored and to NATO to stop expanding to their borders. All of this is about the resources of Ukraine, because it was resource rich right? I think there's a lot of pillaging happening. I think there's money laundering happening with the Biden administration, and I hope they reveal it. I think that there's a impetus now for congressional hearings to look into his business but it's also going to expose a lot of other politicians and a lot of other people in the West, because I think it's all to do with economic gain for them. And they don't care. I mean, you heard them talk publicly about we'll fight to the last Ukrainian. That's dire.
Yeah.
Like, you know?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's one of the, you know, coming back into Donbass, and I sort of think, you know, why am I doing this? Why am I risking myself? Who am I doing it for? And it's not just for people of Donbass and for Europe, for European people. It's also for Ukrainian people. I mean, the amount of Ukrainian soldiers who are dying, some of the videos coming out of Ukraine are disturbing, of people being forcibly, you know, conscripted and being sent to the front lines with very little training to die for a proxy war. And it's like some kind of nightmare. I mean, of Ukrainian, I mean, so many Ukrainians, and Ukrainians are not some homogenous group who are all, I mean, there's a lot of anti-Russia hate now, understandably. There's also so many Ukrainians who don't want war with Russia, who want peace negotiations. Many in Ukraine who support Russia, and their voices just aren't being heard. And if you try and say that, if you say we want peace, we need to listen to the people of Donbass, maybe we can give some territory to the Russians. If you say that, you're going to jail or you'll be killed in Ukraine if you say it publicly or too loudly in the streets. So there's a huge amount of oppression in Ukraine, and increasingly, of course, in Europe and America for anybody who speaks out, even saying the most obvious things. Like every serious person, every serious international analyst knows perfectly well that NATO is largely to blame for provoking this war. I mean, it's not even controversial. It's just basic. It's just basic international relations. But anybody who even says that, just some kind of propagandist, and that's the kind of insanity that our public discourse has moved into, that you can't even say just basic facts without being accused of being some kind of propagandist. And that's very dangerous for society.
You're absolutely right. It is. And on that note, let's talk for a second about censorship. Are you finding that your work, written or video or otherwise, is getting seen, getting heard, or is it being suppressed? Or is it getting better? Is the suppression getting lessened? I mean, what are you seeing in the West as far as being heard as a journalist?
Yeah, I mean, I think my work's been, you know, reasonably successful. I think because I've done really good work, and I'm one of the few reporters here, because it's one of the fantastic independent reporters like Eva Bartlett, etc. So I think, you know, I do interviews like yours and other shows, which I think get a lot of attention. So yes and no. I mean, I think on Twitter, I just started Twitter, you know, sort of recently when I came here. I've never really liked social media. It causes me a lot of anxiety, but I know that I have to do it now. So and that's been pretty successful. I've been told I'm massively shadow banned.
Yes.
But I think that's just an incentive to work harder, really. And you know, some people do work on this. I've just got too much on my plate to focus on it. I just do my best, really. You know, do my best and see. Hope that more and more people see it, and more people are seeing it. I know that, and I get so much support from people around the world, etc. And my work is also, you know, seen by other mainstream journalists as well. I know some people have contacted me about it, so it gets out in different ways, doesn't it? And you know, doing shows like yours, etc. But of course, there is massive censorship now on Twitter and elsewhere. I think you probably know more than I do about that. Are you being censored?
Oh, absolutely. My name was called on Facebook election interference, Tara Reade. But that was back from 2020. Now it's just basically shadow banning me. But I left Facebook when they said that it was okay to use hate speech and kill Russians. And so I deleted my Facebook and my Instagram account. So I just have Twitter, and now I'm still shadow banned a bit, but it's getting a little better since Elon Musk took over, but it's not where it should be, considering how many followers I have. My engagement is pretty low, particularly if I post anything about RT or anything to do with, like, for instance, I share a lot of your work, and that gets, you know what I mean? It doesn't, it's, I have to really share and share and share for it to get seen.
Yeah.
But that's, so we all know now from the Twitter files that there's a collusion happening between the American government, and I believe American intelligence, British intelligence, colluding to infiltrate big tech to, you know, really control the narrative and control.
Yeah. I mean, my view on, I mean, I quite like Elon Musk. I think he's seems like an interesting, fun guy. And I think he genuinely does care about freedom of speech. And I think he has genuinely reformed Twitter for that. My view is that, you know, while he is, I think, a breath of fresh air in many respects in increasing free speech on Twitter, he can only go so far, in my view, or maybe only wants to go so far. Taking on the CIA directly is very, very dangerous, even if you are the richest man in the world. And I get a feeling that on COVID vaccines and things like that, on American politics generally, he really wants to be free and open up. But in terms of this sort of growing proxy war, a third world war between the West and Russia, China, Iran, I think Elon Musk is going to still very much toe the CIA and the American line. So I think you'll see Russian, Iranian, Chinese media, and anybody who promotes Russian, Chinese ideas, I think you'll still see that censored on Twitter. Elon Musk may not tell you, but that's my view. And do I criticize Elon Musk for that? Well, you know, I mean, I think he's done a really good job of that, but, you know, is he powerful enough to take on the CIA? I don't think he is, frankly. So yeah, that's my view on that.
Very, very interesting view. And I tend to agree as far as like that, trying to take on that amount of the CIA and FBI, DOJ, that you know, the three-letter words.
Yeah, right.
And then of course, British intelligence is very active. The NAFO trolls, Elliot Higgins. Well, by the way, he went after me personally for a couple of times. They are, and they're going after me today. The NAFO trolls are, because I'm speaking at an event and said that I love Vladimir Putin or whatever. And I have written positive things about Vladimir Putin. Sorry. I said, go ahead and frame it. I said, because he is good. He's a good leader for his country, for his people. He cares about them. We don't have that in America. I don't know about Europe, but we certainly don't have that here. I mean, the American leaders here just care about lining their pockets and basically, you know, not, I mean, they're sending billions. We're spending almost $1 trillion on our defense budget this year, 887 billion. Next year, if we for that amount, like how much we raised up for the defense, if we do that next year, we will spend $1 trillion on defense. That's obscene. I mean, no one, I think we spent 5 times the amount of almost every other country on earth on defense weapons. And meanwhile, our infrastructure is falling apart. We have people that cannot buy food. 20% of our children's population is living in poverty line or below, 20%. And we have 40% inflation. They say it's going down. It's not. It's still high. People still can't afford fuel here. Gas prices, like for a house, is $500 a month. Water in California and places like that, it's unbelievable. So they're sending billions over to this kind of corrupt country that they used to say, by the way, BBC and all of them, there's all kinds of headlines of them calling them the most corrupt country on earth. Ukraine.
Oh, it's massively corrupt country. I mean, it's I mean, there's a lot of corruption in Russia. Ukraine's on another level. I mean, and all that, when there is a peace to be had in Ukraine, and that's what I keep saying, and what my work is about. There is a peace to be had, and everybody knows that there was a peace to start with. That Russia needs to be listened to. That they want Crimea. I spent time in Crimea as well, by the way, and let me tell you, Crimea, the vast majority of people there are Russian. If you walk around the streets of Sevastopol or Simferopol and ask people, they might even see them want to be part of Russia. They say, I am Russian. And so, you know, giving Crimea and Donbass, the Kherson and Zaporozhye region, they're more complex. You know, there is a lot of Ukrainians there. But there is a peace to be had in Ukraine. And that's what the people, politicians in Europe and America don't want people to know. And that's why you see that censorship, because they don't want people.
They don't want people to talk about the reality of this. And I interrupted you because I wanted to bring something back before I forgot. because I meant to ask you this earlier. There was a New York Times article that's just a couple of days old that said that the US is warming to the idea of helping Ukraine take Crimea back.
Yeah,
And
I mean, I don't. Yeah,
World War III, right?
yeah,
That's
exactly. That will be World War III. Crimea is so important to Russia. You control Crimea, you control the Black Sea, so Russia can get its trading ships and warships out to the Mediterranean. Crimea is so strategically important to Russia. My own view, and this is my personal view, if NATO threaten or look like they might be able to take Crimea, we can start talking, I think, about nuclear weapons or technical nuclear weapons being used by Russia. That's how important it is. If NATO was to send an army and threaten Moscow, that's when they need nuclear weapons. And Crimea is that important to Russia. I think NATO knows perfectly well that Ukraine can't take Crimea. It's not possible. I've been to Crimea. It's a big place. Big population, pro-Russian population. Russia's Black Sea Fleet is there. Ukraine is struggling to hold onto its own territory at the moment. It's not going to happen. NATO know that. The only way they could take Crimea is with full NATO in participation, and that means war with Russia. So they know that. I think at the moment they just want to strike Crimea and they're just constantly trying to escalate this war against Russia. And that's where you wonder where the off-ramp is. The off-ramp is, I'll tell you, the off-ramp is for NATO and Ukraine to declare victory. If NATO and Ukraine says, yes, we've won, we stopped Russia taking over all of the country. Now, it's debatable whether Russia did want to take over the whole country. Frankly, they didn't. But if NATO and Ukraine say, yes, we beat Russia, we're victorious, Slava Ukraini, we won, and then enter peace negotiations with giving Russia territory. That's the off-ramp. But it doesn't seem that the United States is interested at all for some of the reasons you've said.
Yes. Now the Crimea thing, which is quite a red line. I have a theory, and I hope I'm wrong, but unfortunately, because Biden is surrounded by certain people like Vindman, McFaul, Blinken, some other people that really believe that a limited nuclear war is possible. And unfortunately, they're looking at Crimea, and I'm fearful of that, or some sort of red flag, some sort of strange thing happening with Poland. I don't know what. I think that almost happened, but then it was averted. But I'm fearful that the U.S. is going to provoke it for sure. And and they think that a limited nuclear war is possible, and I think that's madness. But you have some people in this Biden administration that are really of the mind that really can't. They're in an echo chamber, and they don't realize that that's not possible. No one will win. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the reason is because the world is a chessboard of competing nation states. And so when you've got the United States, who's ruled the world effectively for the last 50, 70 years, they are acting like any other empire is, and they're trying to retain control of global hegemony. And so that's why you're seeing all these wars. And I mean, the United States, Britain, we're not threatened by invasion with anybody. Why are we involved in so many wars? Nobody's threatening to invade us. But it's because of the United States trying to retain control of its global hegemony. It can't. It's not possible. China, the rise of China is, and NATO cannot defeat Russia and China together. They can't. It's not possible. Russia and China have too big a populations, land, and they've got nukes. It's not possible. But the United States is going to try to do whatever it can to defeat Russia and China, to hold on to its global hegemony. And that's what you're seeing here. And that's why I think, and you're quite right to be worried, and you raise a good potential, what might happen. And that's why that there is that potential of that limited nuclear war or nuclear war, of somebody miscalculating, or the Americans trying everything they can, and because they're so desperate, to try anything, and maybe even provoke a war like that. So that's the danger of it. They play these war games in the Pentagon, and I'm sure they play them in the Kremlin as well. And they'll have one general on one side, one general on the other, and say, well, if we hit Crimea, what will Russia do? Well, Russia, if I was them, would probably hit Kiev hard. Okay, if we use NATO weapons to hit a Russian army, what will Russia do? Russia will probably launch a massive strike on NATO troops in Poland. What do we do? So they play these war games. And that's one of the huge dangers of somebody miscalculating. Or, as you're right, I always thought the concept of MAD, mutually assured destruction, would mean there would be no nuclear war. But I'm beginning to believe that some people in the United States State Department are crazy enough and stupid enough, crazy or stupid, or both, for it to actually happen.
Yeah, there's almost the kind of this macho cowboy thing, and it's really grim to watch. But because we're always hoping, like, I remember I was talking, it was one journalist who said, well, there's people, in behind that want peace, behind the scenes, people you don't know. Well, unfortunately, because of the work that I used to do, I know the people behind the scenes, the ones you don't see in front of the cameras. Those are the ones we worry about. Those are the ones who don't give a shit. And they really are at a point where they'll just do whatever. And they also are there's also a thing where, and I don't know if I believe this, but I've had other people talk about depopulation. There's also been this movement where there are some elites that want less population, and this would be one of those end games. What they don't really calculate in there is that you can't have a limited nuclear war. Like you can't. And then what would be the point afterwards? Like, who would want to live in that, right? In the afterwards.
Yeah.
But I wanted, and this is a really dark, grim conversation, but we have to have it because our consent's being manufactured every single day. And for the support, like in the US and Europe. And I know you're from Great Britain, so for sure, Great Britain is warmongering. And I feel like America's almost an extension of Great Britain's warmongering. Like just
it really is. Britain is the attack dog. And I don't believe it's in the United Kingdom's interest to be an attack dog for an empire, for an American empire, which is not going to be able to hold on to its control. I think Britain's future lies in Europe. I think Europe's future lies with good relations with Russia and then accepting the reality that we've now moved into the multipolar world and start trading with these other countries rather than trying to fight them. That's my belief. And I do this work also as a patriot. I do this work as a patriot, a British patriot, a European patriot, because I do not believe that European British policy is correct at the moment. I believe it's not in the interests of our people, and we need the changing world needs new policy thinking. And the reality is that politicians in the West have ruled the world, also with a kind of racist colonial attitude for so long. They think that world is continuing. It's not continuing. The world has changed. We now live in a multipolar world. China and Russia are too strong now. And so we have to have new policy thinking based on that. But all these policymakers have grown up with this idea and they can't let it go. It's very hard to let that go. But we've moved into this new world, so we need new policy thinking. And so I think it's for the benefit of Britain, Europe, and the United States to change its policies, because they're not going to win this way.
That's very eloquently put, and I'm glad that you talked about being a patriot, because you are. You're talking about, and I am, because I want to stick up for the American working class. You're talking about the British working class, and European working class, and Ukrainian working class, right? And in Donbass, and the people that are being, basically used cannon fodder. But the main thing here is too that, that whole idea of the multipolar world, it's already a reality. The BRICS agreement, everything that's going on, it's already happened. And it's like the US is just trying to pull it back. And in fact, I feel like the US kind of tanked Europe on purpose.
Well, there's a feeling in Russia from the Russian government that the United States is instead of now trying to pillage Africa and Asia, etc., it's now trying to eat Europe. It's now trying to focus its attention on trying to devour Europe, exploit Europe, perhaps a better word. That's very much the feeling from the Russian government. And you see that with now the struggling energy. Now, Europe used to get cheap energy from Russia, not anymore. And so British European industry is struggling. And where's it going to go? It's going to go to the United States. So this is why I say that many European conservative, patriot, nationalist politicians who are starting to think this is not in our interest. And I think that's the most likely way the war will end. when you hear more of these European voices really stand up and say, no, actually, who's our biggest enemy here, Russia or the United States? And I think we'll start to see that split grow ever wider.
Yeah, I think that'll happen as their political futures are threatened as well. Some of the politicians like Macron and some of the other ones, they start losing their power, slips away, their popularity.
Yeah.
I think they'll say, you know, because they're basically puppets right now for the Western regime. But
or you'll see new politicians win power. I mean, you know, one of my favorite phrases is, we're living in the middle of history, not the end of history. Anything can happen. You know, genocide in Europe, World War III, nuclear weapons, everything's on the table. You know, a radical politician, far right or far left, gaining power in a major European power. Marine Le Pen, you know, far right leader of France, she may well get into power in our lifetime. And why? Because many people were warning there could be a huge economic collapse or problems in the near future. People have been warning it for years. But if there's a huge economic downturn in Europe, the extreme parties are not too far away from power, on the left or on the right. And that's when you could see huge changes as well. With economic change really happens when the economy is in real trouble. If the economy gets in real trouble, you could see huge political changes and leaders who you didn't expect to gain power years ago gaining power. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, I want to take a second before we kind of get close to our wrap up here. And I know you have to get on with your day. You have a lot of work ahead of you, I'm sure. Reif, do we have any questions from the audience or comments?
I've got one. So this is from Critical Thinking, and they asked if there was any countries, journalists, or a particular publication you feel like is accurate with the reporting in Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, I think like anything, you need to pull sources from different areas. So, you know, for my work, you know, and as also, you know, with the work I do on the ground, but also in terms of, you know, understanding the conflicts and information from elsewhere, I get my information from various sources. The Telegram channels are very important now. Local Telegram channels, sort of independent journalist Telegram channels, publishing footage of the war on the front lines. You know, I watch Russian media. Some articles in the mainstream are very good. If you know how to, you know, read the mainstream articles, sometimes there's very good articles coming out. Noam Chomsky would talk about the best journalists playing the media like a violin, knowing when they can get out information. So it's very much cross-referencing local sources, Russian or Chinese or Iranian sources, with the Western sources, and sort of cross-referencing everything in order to find out, you know, what's really going on. But also there's some good speakers, you know, Scott Ritter, is it Douglas McGregor? They're very much military experts. Sometimes I think they get things wrong and they make bold predictions, but I generally agree with their basic premise that the more Ukraine fights, the more it will be destroyed. So they're obviously, you know, military experts who are interesting, and, you know, and don't believe everything everybody says as well. You know, I've probably made some mistakes as well, so human mistakes as well, small, nothing major, but, you know, so it's listening to various, you know, John Mearsheimer, of course, you know, is an importance of intellectual in terms of the conflict. But it's very much not listening to one person, and it's cross-referencing and looking at different sources. And also understanding historical context. You can't understand a conflict without understanding historical context. I was in Ukraine in 2014, and my fixer said to me, who's in the Ukrainian revolution or coup, whatever you want to call it, my fixer's mother was waving a flag proudly above her head in the square. And then my fixer said, "What do you think of all this?" And I said, "This won't end well." Because, you know, I've reported on conflicts and revolutions all around the world. And I've seen that some revolutions, some coups, they're a disaster for the country. You know, Libya, Syria, Ukraine. So I saw this was pumped through the rest of money, all the rest of it, that this was going to be a disaster and it was going to split Ukrainian people. So it's very much understanding context and history in order to understand current events as well. So I think, you know, that's important as well.
Well said, because, you know, the U.S. support of Ukrainian nationalists goes back to 1945 and 1950, right after World War II. So there was and those CIA unclassified documents have been now, like, people can disseminate them. And a good historian, Laurie Spencer, who's online, you can find her, did a Twitter roll just about that, like with the documents themselves, and showed the different operations that were done to support Nazis in Ukraine and help them grow.
Yeah.
So this started even before 2014. And what
Yeah.
you mentioned is no doubt a coup. And I just want to say a shout out to Julian Assange, who gave up his freedom to give us the information about the warmongering of the West, and really the revelations about Victoria Nuland and the West that was behind that coup. And then, of course, you had Anthony Blinken with his attempt in Moscow, and that didn't go well for him. But Victoria Nuland unfortunately had the backing and the Western backing of that resulted with Maidan. And I think if people that are watching and listening, you can find out more about that with Ukraine on Fire. If you watch Oliver Stone's Ukraine on Fire, Rumble, that gives you a real sense of historical through interviews and it was made years ago, and it's award-winning. It's very good. Tell just for a second, because you mentioned Maidan, could you talk about your experience there? Because I find that fascinating that you were there in that moment of history.
Yeah, I mean, that went on for a while, so I wasn't on the moment when if I got over the line, so to speak. But so I was there a couple of times when everyone is protesting in the squares and all the rest of it. And, speaking to people there, because it was very much the Ukrainian nationalists who are sort of in the north and the east and center taking power at the expense.
Oh, you froze a little bit. We're having interference. We'll get him sorted. Can you find out what's going on there, Reef? Okay.
So
would rise up and fight.
There, he's back.
There we have it. We lost you for a minute. Okay, so we lost you right when you were talking about right at the beginning. So sorry.
So I was in Maidan, and it was very much the Ukrainian nationalists taking power at the expense of nationality. So when the Ukrainian nationalists took power and started repressing the Russian language, of course, Russian people didn't want to be part of that. The best way I can explain it, I can't think of an American example, but I'll give you a British example, which I'm sure people understand. If Britain is a united kingdom of 4 different nations: England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. If an English national government took power in London and started suppressing the Scottish culture — I'm Scottish, by the way, and who lives in London — started suppressing the Scottish culture, Scottish people would protest. Let me tell you that. They'd take to the streets. And then if English nationalists started killing some of these Scottish protesters, you'd have even more protests. And then if the English sent an army up to Scotland and started bombing Edinburgh and Glasgow, let me tell you, you'd have civil war. And it's impossible it's hard to think of Britain becoming Scots fighting English again. But let me tell you, that's what would happen. And that's what happened in Ukraine. Most Ukrainians would be the same. If Scotland and England started fighting each other, we'd all be...
I'll give it a second.
What they were standing in front of a burnt out house saying, what the hell is going on here? Why is it government? And that's what happened. And that's how civil wars are started. So Maidan was a disaster for the Ukrainian people. And it's what in the long term has led to this war.
Well, yeah, it is. And I think people are starting to see that there's a much deeper history to this than what's been presented in Western media. So thank you for all you do. Where can people follow your work and keep up with what you're doing? Where's the best places?
So a lot of my work is TV, and then on Twitter, Telegram, I think. Follow me. So
Okay, so Telegram's good, Twitter, okay.
Twitter's
and then we have your links. Yeah, we have your links up, and I just want to thank you because I think it's such an honor to talk to you. You have such integrity and such bravery, and thank you for what you're doing. It's a service for all of us, and I don't think, I know it feels pretty thankless, and you're having to go face the day, and it's a hard time. So you're bringing a lot of truth where there's darkness and a lot of propaganda. So thank you for what you're doing.
No, thank you, Tara. I really appreciate that. And I really appreciate the messages from people all around the world actually just saying similar things. It really does mean a lot and helps us keep going. So thanks so much, Tara.
Yeah. All right. You're valued.
Right.
All right. So everyone, thank you for joining us tonight. That was Johnny Miller. Please follow him on Twitter. Follow him every way you can on Telegram and Press TV to get a little more perspective and truth because we're missing that here in the West. And so support them however you can. Support independent media as well. INN, Independent News Network. Thank you, Reef, for helping me tonight. And thank you,
You're so
Indy.
welcome.
Kim Iverson, the Kim Iverson Show, follow her. She's trying to get truth out there. She can only do it on Rumble. Rumble seems to be our home right now. If you have to talk about things that, that kind of push back against the U.S. government narrative right now, or the Western government narrative, actually. So we'll see you next time. Take care, everyone. We'll see you next Monday night. Be safe. Good night.